American Old West. The very phrase conjures images of rugged individualists, wide-open spaces, heroic gunfights, and the untamed spirit of freedom. It's a landscape painted with vibrant hues of adventure, courage, and limitless opportunity, immortalized in countless films, novels, and campfire legends. We envision cowboys riding off into sunsets, homesteaders building dreams with their bare hands, and lawmen bringing justice to a wild frontier. But behind this romanticized veil lies a reality that was far grittier, far more brutal, and undeniably more terrifying than most are willing to admit. The truth of frontier life was not always about grand adventures. It was often a relentless, soul-crushing struggle for mere survival against odds that would break the spirit of modern man. Today, we're stripping away the layers of myth to reveal 10 horrible truths about the Old West, realities so stark and unforgiving that they stand in stark contrast to the idyllic tales we've all grown up with. Prepare to look beyond the silver screen and into the harsh, unvarnished crucible that forged a nation. A crucible where life was cheap, comfort was a luxury, and death lurked around every corner, often in the most mundane and insidious forms. This isn't the West of dime novels. This is the true, unforgiving frontier. Truth number 1. Disease was a far greater killer than bullets. When we think of death in the Old West, our minds immediately leap to gunfights, duels at high noon, or dramatic showdowns with outlaws. The reality is profoundly different and far less cinematic. For every man who fell with his boots on in a blaze of glory, dozens, if not hundreds, succumbed to ailments that today are either easily treatable or entirely preventable. Disease was the silent, ubiquitous predator of the frontier, claiming lives with a ruthless efficiency that no outlaw gang could ever match. Cholera, smallpox, typhoid, dysentery, malaria, tuberculosis, diphtheria. These were the true lords of death on the frontier, decimating populations with horrifying speed and impartiality. The conditions of frontier life were a perfect breeding ground for these epidemics. Settlements, often springing up overnight, lacked any semblance of modern sanitation. Human and animal waste often contaminated water sources, turning rivers and wells into conduits of deadly bacteria. Personal hygiene was rudimentary at best. Daily bathing was a rarity, fresh clothing a luxury, and understanding of germ theory non-existent. People lived in close quarters, sharing cups, blankets, and breathing the same stale air, allowing airborne diseases to spread like wildfire through entire communities. The lack of refrigeration meant food was often spoiled, contributing to widespread gastrointestinal illnesses. Medical knowledge was primitive, and qualified doctors were few and far between, often hundreds of miles from remote settlements. Those who did practice medicine often relied on antiquated methods, unproven remedies, or outright quackery. Amputations were performed without anesthesia or sterile conditions, leading to agonizing deaths from infection. Simple fevers could escalate into fatal conditions due to the absence of antibiotics. Childbirth was a perilous journey for both mother and infant, with high mortality rates for both. A seemingly minor cut could become a death sentence if it festered. The sheer scale of this mortality is staggering. During the California Gold Rush, for instance, it's estimated that more people died from disease than from any other cause, including mining accidents or violence. Cholera outbreaks on wagon trails could wipe out entire families in a matter of days, leaving graves scattered across the plains. Smallpox, brought by settlers, devastated Native American populations who had no immunity, altering the demographic landscape of the West forever. The sheer omnipresence of sickness meant that every family, every individual, lived under a constant shadow, knowing that at any moment, a cough, a fever, or a bout of diarrhea could quickly spiral into an irreversible descent towards the grave. This was the true, terrifying lottery of the Old West. Not whether you'd face a bandit, but whether you'd survive the invisible killers lurking in the water, the air, and every unwashed hand. Truth number 2. The stench and filth were ever present. Forget the fresh, clean air depicted in westerns, where characters gallop across pristine prairies. The reality of frontier life was a constant assault on the senses, dominated by a pervasive, inescapable stench and an overwhelming level of filth that would be unimaginable to us today. Hygiene, as we understand it, simply didn't exist. contributing directly to the rampant disease we just discussed. Life on the frontier was fundamentally, unapologetically dirty. Consider the average frontier town. Streets were unpaved, turning into muddy quagmires after rain or dusty, fly-ridden thoroughfares in dry weather. These streets served as open sewers for human and animal waste. Outhouses were commonplace, but their contents often seeped into the ground, contaminating water sources. Animals, essential for transport and labor, were everywhere. Horses, cattle, pigs, chickens, and their waste accumulated, attracting swarms of flies and creating a pungent, acrid aroma that hung heavy in the air. Slaughterhouses, if present, were rudimentary and their refuse often discarded carelessly, further adding to the putrid environment. Inside homes and establishments, conditions were scarcely better. Bathing was a rare luxury, often a full-day affair involving heating water and a portable tub, meaning most people went weeks, if not months, without a full wash. Clothes were worn for extended periods, seldom laundered, carrying the grime and sweat of physical labor. Shared beds, common in boarding houses and even family homes, meant close contact with unwashed bodies and unlaundered linens. Insects, fleas, lice, bedbugs were an everyday nuisance, living in clothes, bedding, and hair, causing constant itching and discomfort. Sod houses and log cabins, while providing shelter, were often dusty, damp, and poorly ventilated. Cooking fires filled interiors with smoke and soot. Water for drinking and cooking was often drawn from contaminated wells or rivers, carrying not just pathogens, but also silt and impurities. Food preparation surfaces were rarely sanitized. Plates and utensils were often wiped clean rather than properly washed, if they were washed at all. The combined effect was an environment where the senses were constantly overwhelmed. The smell of unwashed bodies, stale sweat, animal waste, cooking fires, stale food, and the general miasma of decay permeated everything. This wasn't just an aesthetic inconvenience. It was a fundamental aspect of daily existence that wore down the body and the spirit. Living in such conditions required a level of tolerance for discomfort and a desensitization to filth that modern sensibilities would find utterly abhorrent. The romantic image of the lone cowboy riding into town often conveniently omits the reality of him dismounting, covered in trail dust, smelling of horse and weeks of unwashed humanity, stepping into a saloon where the floor was likely caked with spit, sawdust, and who knows what else. The frontier was a world where cleanliness was a luxury, not a given, and the battle against grime was a losing one for most. Truth number 3. Food was monotonous, scarce, and often unhealthy. The image of a hearty frontier meal often involves a smoking chuck wagon, sizzling steaks, or a bountiful harvest. The reality for most pioneers, cowboys, and miners was a diet that was monotonous, often nutritionally deficient, and sometimes dangerously scarce. Survival, not gourmet dining, was the order of the day, and the available options were dictated by geography, season, and the sheer difficulty of preservation and transport. For many, the staple diet consisted of variations on flour, beans, and salt pork. Flour was used to make hardtack, biscuits, or simple bread. Beans provided protein and fiber. Salt pork, heavily preserved, offered a source of fat and calories, though it was often rancid or overly salted, contributing to health issues. Fresh meat, while available through hunting or livestock, was not a daily certainty. Hunting was time-consuming and unpredictable, and livestock was an investment that often couldn't be easily slaughtered or preserved. When fresh meat was available, it was often eaten quickly before spoilage set in, especially without refrigeration. The absence of fresh fruits and vegetables led to widespread nutritional deficiencies. Scurvy, a disease caused by a lack of vitamin C, was common, manifesting as bleeding gums, fatigue, and open sores. Malnutrition was a constant threat, weakening individuals and making them more susceptible to disease. Even when food was plentiful in terms of calories, it often lacked the diversity of nutrients essential for long-term health. The challenges of food preservation were immense. Without ice or refrigeration, meat was smoked, salted, or dried, jerky. Vegetables and fruits could be canned if one had the equipment and knowledge, or dried. These methods, while effective, often altered the taste and texture of food and didn't always retain full nutritional value. The Transportation of fresh produce over vast distances was impractical, meaning that for many, their diet remained limited to non-perishable staples. Consider the diets of specific groups. Cowboys on a cattle drive lived on chuck wagon grub, beans, coffee, biscuits, salt pork, and whatever fresh game could be shot. Miners often ate similar fare, supplemented by whatever canned goods or dried provisions could be hauled into remote camps. Homesteaders, particularly in their early years, faced the constant risk of crop failure meaning they might go hungry for months if their harvest failed or was destroyed by weather or pests. The psychological impact of such a diet cannot be overstated. Eating the same few bland, often poorly prepared foods day after day, month after month, contributed to a sense of weariness and deprivation. The occasional feast or treat would have been savored not just for its taste but for its sheer novelty. The romantic image of frontier abundance often glosses over the reality of constant hunger, the gnawing anxiety of an empty larder, and the sheer monotony of a diet that was designed solely for survival, not enjoyment. For many, the fight for food was a daily, grinding battle, far removed from the idealized images of frontier feasting. Truth number 4, isolation and loneliness were crushing. The American West is often depicted as the ultimate escape, a place where individuals could find freedom and forge their own destiny, unburdened by the constraints of society. While the vast open spaces did offer a certain kind of liberty, they also imposed a crushing burden of isolation and loneliness that drove many to despair, and some even to madness. The sheer scale of the landscape meant that human contact was often a rare and precious commodity. Imagine settling on a homestead where your nearest neighbor was 5, 10, or even 20 miles away. Travel was slow and arduous, by horse or wagon, making casual visits impossible. For many pioneers, weeks or even months could pass without seeing another human face beyond their immediate family. This was especially true for women, who were often left alone for extended periods while their husbands worked fields, hunted, or traveled to the nearest town for supplies. The silence, broken only by the wind or the cries of wild animals, could be deafening. This profound isolation had severe psychological consequences. Without regular social interaction, community support, or intellectual stimulation, people often succumbed to deep depression. Stories abound of prairie madness, a term used to describe the mental deterioration experienced by women, in particular, due to the extreme isolation, monotony of daily chores, and the overwhelming emptiness of the landscape. Symptoms included withdrawal, hallucinations, and even violence. Communication with the outside world was minimal. Letters were infrequent and took weeks or months to arrive. Newspapers were outdated by the time they reached remote areas. The sense of being completely cut off from the familiar world, from friends and family left behind in the East, was a constant emotional weight. There was no instant communication, no digital connection to alleviate the feeling of being utterly alone in an unforgiving wilderness. Even in burgeoning towns, a sense of isolation could persist. Many were transient communities of miners, cowboys, or loggers, where individuals moved frequently, making it difficult to form lasting bonds. Trust was often hard-earned, and the constant presence of strangers, some with dubious intentions, could foster a sense of guardedness rather than camaraderie. For those who didn't fit in, or who lacked the social skills to navigate these rough-and-tumble environments, the loneliness could be just as intense as on a solitary homestead. The romantic image of the lone cowboy riding across the plains often overlooks the profound psychological toll of such solitude. While it speaks to independence, it rarely acknowledges the deep, aching void that accompanied it. The frontier was a place where many faced their inner demons without the comfort or distraction of human society. It was a test of mental fortitude as much as physical resilience, and for countless individuals, the silent struggle against loneliness proved to be the most formidable adversary of all. Truth number 5. The weather was a brutal, unpredictable killer. The majesty of the Western landscape is undeniable, but beneath its breathtaking beauty lay a volatile and often lethal environment where nature itself was a constant, formidable enemy. The weather on the frontier was not merely an inconvenience, it was a force of destruction, unpredictable and capable of wiping out years of hard work, entire livelihoods, and even lives in an instant. Pioneers and settlers lived in a perpetual state of vulnerability to the whims of an untamed climate. Blizzards were among the most feared phenomena. The vast open plains offered no shelter from the howling winds and plummeting temperatures. Winter storms could descend with terrifying speed, trapping travelers, freezing livestock to death, and burying homes under drifts of snow. Without adequate warning or modern heating, these blizzards were deadly. Families could starve or freeze to death if caught unprepared, their supplies cut off for weeks. The infamous children's blizzard of 1888, for instance, claimed hundreds of lives, many of them school children caught off guard. Conversely, droughts were equally devastating. Extended periods without rain turned fertile plains into arid dust bowls. Crops withered and died, leaving homesteaders facing starvation and financial ruin. Livestock perished from lack of water and forage. The dust storms that accompanied these droughts were immense, choking out the sun, burying homes, and causing respiratory illnesses. The Dust Bowl conditions of the 1930s, while later than the traditional Old West period, were an extreme example of an ever-present threat. Prairie fires, ignited by lightning or carelessness, were another terrifying specter. Fueled by dry grasses and driven by high winds, these fires could sweep across vast distances with incredible speed, consuming everything in their path: homes, crops, livestock, and people. There was little defense against such an inferno on the open plains, often only frantic backburning or a desperate flight. Beyond these, flash floods could turn dry gullies into raging torrents, washing away entire settlements. Tornadoes, particularly in the central plains, could appear with little warning, tearing through nascent communities. Hailstorms could destroy an entire season's crops in minutes. The absence of sophisticated weather forecasting, early warning systems, or resilient infrastructure meant that settlers were almost entirely at the mercy of these natural forces. A single severe weather event could erase years of struggle and sacrifice, forcing families to abandon their dreams and start anew, if they survived at all. This constant battle against the elements instilled a deep sense of humility and fatalism in those who lived through it. The romantic idea of conquering the wilderness often overlooked the stark reality that more often than not, the wilderness conquered back, reminding humanity of its inherent smallness in the face of nature's raw power. Life on the frontier was a gamble against the weather, a gamble that many ultimately lost. Truth number 6, childhood was short, brutal, and often ended prematurely. The image of children in the Old West is often one of rosy-cheeked youngsters playing simple games, or perhaps helping with chores. The grim truth is that childhood on the frontier was a period of immense hardship, relentless labor, and a constant threat of premature death. The idyllic innocence associated with youth was a luxury few frontier children could afford. Child mortality rates were astronomically high compared to modern standards. Diseases like diphtheria, measles, whooping cough, and scarlet fever, which are now largely preventable or treatable, swept through communities, claiming the lives of infants and young children with alarming frequency. Without access to vaccinations, modern medicine, or even basic understanding of hygiene, a child's chances of reaching adulthood were significantly lower than today. Many families buried multiple children, a common and heartbreaking reality that shaped the emotional landscape of the frontier. Beyond disease, accidents were a constant danger. Children worked from a very young age, often performing tasks that would be deemed unsafe for adults today. They herded livestock, helped with farming, fetched water, and assisted in household chores, often exposed to dangerous tools, animals, and environments. Falls, drownings, snake bites, and injuries from farm equipment were tragically common. The vast, untamed landscape itself posed threats. Encounters with wild animals, getting lost in the wilderness, or falling into unprotected wells. Education was often sporadic or non-existent. While some communities established one-room schoolhouses, attendance was often irregular, especially during planting and harvesting seasons when every pair of hands was needed. Many children received little formal schooling, instead learning practical skills essential for survival from their parents. Their education was less about academics and more about resilience, self-sufficiency, and enduring hardship. The emotional toll on children and their parents was immense. Witnessing death, poverty, and constant struggle from an early age hardened many. There was little room for elaborate play or extended periods of carefree youth. Children were expected to contribute to the family's survival, and their roles were defined by necessity rather than developmental stages. For girls, this often meant learning to cook, clean, sew, and care for younger siblings, preparing for a life of domestic drudgery and early marriage. For boys, it meant manual labor, hunting, and learning the skills of farming or ranching. The frontier stripped away the protective layers of childhood, exposing youngsters to the raw, unforgiving realities of life and death. The children of the Old West were often miniature adults, burdened with responsibilities and facing dangers that would horrify contemporary society. Their resilience was extraordinary, but it came at a profound cost, often leaving them with scars, both physical and emotional, that lasted a lifetime. The romantic image of a frontier family often overlooks the heartbreaking reality of so many small, unmarked graves dotting the landscape. Truth number 7. Violence was pervasive, but rarely heroic. The enduring myth of the Old West revolves around the heroic gunfighter, the noble lawman, and the dramatic showdown. The truth of violence on the frontier was far less glamorous, far more brutal, and often shockingly mundane. While gunfights did occur, they were infrequent and rarely resembled the stylized duels seen in films. The real violence was a pervasive, often arbitrary, and deeply unsettling aspect of daily life, taking many forms beyond the romanticized shootout. Law enforcement was often rudimentary or non-existent in vast stretches of the frontier. This vacuum allowed for widespread lawlessness, where disputes were often settled not by courts, but by brute force, intimidation, or mob rule. Claim jumping in mining towns, cattle rustling, and horse theft were common, leading to violent confrontations. Vigilante justice, often swift and brutal, was a frequent response to perceived criminality, with lynchings being a grim reality for many accused, sometimes innocent individuals. These acts were rarely about justice, but about raw power and control. Violence against marginalized groups was particularly rampant and unpunished. Native Americans faced systematic displacement, massacres, and brutal suppression by settlers and the military. Chinese immigrants, crucial for railroad construction, endured horrific discrimination, physical assaults, and riots driven by xenophobia and economic resentment. Mexican Americans, whose lands were absorbed by the expanding United States, often faced land theft and violence. African Americans, seeking new opportunities after the Civil War, encountered racism and violence that mirrored the Jim Crow South. These were not isolated incidents, but a systemic pattern of violence that shaped the racial and ethnic landscape of the West. Beyond intergroup conflict, personal violence was also common. Alcohol consumption was high, often fueling brawls, stabbings, and impulsive shootings in saloons and gambling dens. Arguments over land, women, or a bad hand of cards could quickly escalate into deadly encounters. Domestic violence, while rarely documented, was undoubtedly a grim reality in isolated homes where social norms provided little protection for victims. The true nature of gun violence was also far from cinematic. Most gunfights were chaotic, often drunken affairs, with participants firing wildly and inaccurately. The famous OK Corral shootout, often depicted as a slow-motion ballet of marksmanship, was in reality a quick, messy, and confused exchange of gunfire. Injuries were horrific, with limited medical care leading to agonizing deaths or permanent disfigurement. There was no glory in being shot, only pain, fear, and a high likelihood of a miserable end. This pervasive undercurrent of violence meant that trust was a rare commodity. Every stranger could be a threat, every dispute a potential death sentence. Life was cheap, and human dignity often counted for little. The frontier was a place where strength, intimidation, and the willingness to resort to force often held more sway than law or morality, creating a society that was far more savage and terrifying than the romanticized versions would ever lead us to believe. Truth number 8. Life was an endless cycle of back-breaking labor and exhaustion. The spirit of the Old West is often associated with independence and freedom, but for the vast majority of its inhabitants, daily life was defined by an unrelenting, back-breaking cycle of physical labor that stretched from dawn till dusk every single day. There was little respite, few conveniences, and the sheer effort required for basic survival was immense, leading to widespread exhaustion. chronic pain, and prematurely aged bodies. Consider the homesteader. Clearing land meant felling trees by hand, removing stubborn rocks, and breaking sod with a plow pulled by animals. Planting, cultivating, and harvesting crops were manual processes, often performed under a scorching sun or in freezing conditions. Building a home, whether a sod house, dugout, or log cabin, involved hours of strenuous physical work, from digging foundations to hauling heavy timbers or cutting and stacking sod bricks. Fences had to be built and maintained, wells dug, and outbuildings constructed. Every aspect of creating a life on the frontier was a testament to sheer physical grit. For miners, the work was even more brutal and dangerous, hacking at rock faces underground with picks and shovels, hauling ore in carts, and constantly battling cave-ins. Poor ventilation and the risk of explosions was a daily reality. The physical toll was immense, leading to lung diseases, debilitating injuries, and shortened lifespans. Ranching, too, was far from the romanticized image of leisurely rides across the range. Cowboys spent long hours in the saddle, often in extreme weather, rounding up cattle, branding, mending fences, and driving herds across hundreds of miles. This involved endless days of physical exertion, often with little sleep, subsisting on basic grub. Injuries from falls, stampedes, or angry cattle were common. Even seemingly simple domestic tasks for women were arduous: fetching water from a distant well, chopping firewood, cooking over an open fire or stove, washing clothes by hand with lye soap, making and mending clothing, gardening, preserving food, and caring for numerous children. All were physically demanding tasks, performed without the aid of modern appliances. The work was never ending, the physical demands constant, and the opportunity for rest minimal. There were no weekends, no vacations, no labor-saving devices. The concept of leisure as we understand it was almost non-existent. Survival depended on constant toil. Bodies were worn out quickly, ravaged by hard work, poor diet, and lack of medical care. Arthritis, chronic back pain, missing limbs, and early senility were common. People aged rapidly, their faces etched with the lines of relentless struggle, and their bodies broken by the demands of the frontier. The dream of striking it rich or building a prosperous life was often realized only through a lifetime of exhausting, soul-crushing labor that left little room for anything else. Truth number 9. Poverty and economic failure were widespread. The allure of the American West was often the promise of land, gold, or a new beginning, a chance to escape poverty and build a fortune. While some did achieve remarkable success, the grim reality for many was a cycle of poverty, economic hardship, and devastating failure. The frontier was a land of broken dreams as much as it was a land of opportunity. Homesteading, for example, was an incredibly risky venture. The promise of free land under the Homestead Act of 1862 attracted millions, but the success rate was far from guaranteed. Many homesteaders lacked the necessary farming experience, capital, or knowledge of the unique challenges of Western agriculture. Droughts, floods, hailstorms, and prairie fires could wipe out an entire season's crops, plunging families into debt and despair. Pests like grasshoppers could decimate fields overnight. Without a harvest, there was no income, no food, and no way to pay for supplies. Many simply gave up, abandoning their claims and moving on, often more impoverished than when they started. The iconic image of the lone farmer persevering often overlooks the countless who failed and faded into obscurity. Mining, too, was a lottery. The vast majority of prospectors never struck it rich. They spent years toiling in dangerous conditions, often accumulating debts for supplies, only to find meager pickings or nothing at all. The real wealth in mining towns often went to the merchants who supplied the miners, or to large corporations that could afford the heavy machinery needed for large-scale operations, not to the individual prospector. Boomtowns could turn into ghost towns overnight when the ore ran out, leaving behind a trail of destitution. Even for those who found work, wages were often low and job security non-existent. Cowboys, while iconic, earned modest pay and faced long periods of unemployment between cattle drives. Laborers in various industries faced harsh conditions, long hours, and little protection from exploitation. The credit system often trapped families in a cycle of debt, as they bought supplies on credit, hoping for a successful harvest or a lucky strike to pay it off. When that didn't materialize, they faced foreclosure, losing everything they had invested. The financial infrastructure was rudimentary, with few banks in remote areas, making it difficult to secure loans or protect savings. Economic downturns like the Panic of 1873 had far-reaching consequences, causing widespread unemployment and bankruptcies across the nation, including the frontier. For many, the West was a place of perpetual struggle, where one bad season, one lost animal, or one failed venture could mean the difference between survival and utter destitution. The dream of a fresh start often devolved into a desperate scramble for pennies, and the promise of prosperity remained just that, a promise often unfulfilled. Truth number 10. Life lacked even the most basic comforts and conveniences. When we envision frontier life, we often project modern expectations onto it, forgetting the utter absence of what we consider fundamental comforts and conveniences. The truth is that life in the Old West was a constant exercise in deprivation, a brutal stripping away of almost all amenities, leaving only the bare necessities and a relentless struggle against discomfort. Housing itself was primitive. Many early settlers lived in sod houses or dugouts, structures carved into hillsides or built from blocks of prairie sod. While offering insulation, these homes were often dark, damp, infested with insects and rodents, and prone to leaking. Log cabins, while an improvement, were still rustic, often with dirt floors, drafty walls, and minimal windows. There was no concept of modern insulation, climate control, or even basics. Plumbing. Running water was a dream. Every drop of water for drinking, cooking, and washing had to be manually fetched from a well, spring, or river, often a significant distance from the home. This was a daily, arduous chore, especially for women and children. Heating came from wood-burning fireplaces or stoves, requiring constant tending and a steady supply of chopped firewood, another physically demanding task. Lighting was by candlelight, oil lamps, or moonlight, making evenings dim and short. Sanitation, as previously discussed, was non-existent. Outhouses were the norm, often far from the house, and bathing facilities were rudimentary. Clothes were washed by hand in large tubs, a laborious and time-consuming process. Food preservation methods were basic, limiting the variety and freshness of available provisions. Beyond the home, the lack of infrastructure meant everything was harder. Roads were unpaved tracks, travel was slow and uncomfortable, and transportation of goods was expensive and difficult. There were no widespread communication networks, no instant news, no readily available entertainment beyond local gatherings or one's own imagination. Medical care was scarce, legal recourse limited, and educational opportunities often minimal. Personal possessions were few and highly valued. Most families owned only what they could carry or what was essential for survival. Luxuries were almost unheard of. The concept of personal space was also very different. Families often lived in one or two rooms, sharing beds and living in close proximity, with little privacy. This constant state of discomfort and deprivation wore down the human spirit. It required an immense capacity for resilience and a complete redefinition of what constituted a comfortable life. For us, a day without electricity or running water is a major inconvenience. For them, it was simply Tuesday. The romanticized image of the rugged individualist often overlooks the brutal reality of a life lived without the simplest of comforts, where every day was a testament to endurance against an environment that actively resisted ease and convenience. The true frontier was a crucible, designed to test the absolute limits of human hardiness, and it was a test that demanded everything. The tales of the American Old West are woven into the very fabric of our national identity, embodying ideals of freedom, courage, and pioneering spirit. But as we've explored these 10 horrible truths, it becomes clear that the romanticized version, however appealing, is a sanitization of a brutal reality. Life on the frontier was not a grand adventure for most. It was a relentless, grinding struggle against disease, filth, isolation, environmental fury, crushing labor, and pervasive violence, all compounded by a profound lack of basic comforts and the constant threat of economic ruin. The men and women who ventured west were not just heroes of legend. They were survivors in the most literal sense, facing daily hardships that would break the modern spirit. Their courage was not just in gunfights, but in enduring the silent, agonizing death of a child, the gnawing emptiness of isolation, the relentless ache of physical labor, and the constant fear of the next blizzard or drought. Understanding these unvarnished truths doesn't diminish their legacy, it elevates it. It allows us to appreciate the true grit, resilience, and sheer tenacity required to carve out a life in a land that was as unforgiving as it was beautiful. The Old West was a crucible, a harsh testing ground that forged character through suffering. By peeling back the layers of myth, we gain a deeper, more profound respect for the real pioneers, those who faced down not just outlaws, but also cholera, starvation, loneliness, and the brutal indifference of nature itself. Their story is far more complex, far more human, and ultimately, far more compelling than any Hollywood fantasy. If you found this deep dive into the harsh realities of frontier life insightful and challenging to your preconceived notions, please consider subscribing to our channel. We're dedicated to uncovering the authentic history of the Old West, one myth-busting truth at a time. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next exploration into the untold stories of America's most legendary era. We appreciate your support in bringing these hidden histories to light.